Good morning. We continue our journey in Samach Vav. We are on page 59. Middle of the page, the new paragraph on page 59. We're also coming from Beis Nissen. Beis Nissen was the Rebbe Rashab's yahrzeit in the year Tafresh Pei. So it would be 106 years because we're now Tafshin Pei Vav. So 106 years, 1920, and we're in 2026. So with that said, what are we in the middle of? We're in the middle of discussing Zman, time. But time in the context, not just a discussion about time, in the context of the structure of existence. So the Rebbe Rashab, in elaborate detail, relatively speaking, based on a maimer from the Alter Rebbe and some other maimorim, explained that time is a very particular part of creation that begins at a certain point. The very definition of time, it's a creation, bria. That's why we can't ask why the world wasn't created earlier, because there was no earlier. And that very time, how did it form from a timeless state of ongoing divine reality, Ein Sof, that he called it, Achdus, Hiskalulus. How did it get from a place of that type of state of seamlessness and timelessness through the process of Ratzo v'shuv? Since the way the God chose to create existence was through light, through energy. Energy is only a reflection of the source. So in other places that he cited in the footnotes, he explains that's why there's a Ratzo v'shuv. And the Ratzo v'shuv, in the context of what we learned here, is that the Ratzo v'shuv is basically the regulator, like the interface, the regulator, that the flow should not be overwhelming, but also there should be enough. So just like the flow of the heart, the circulation of the blood in the human system, what does the heart do? The pump of the heart, it regulates it through contraction, expansion. That's a Ratzo v'shuv. Same thing with the breath, an inhale and exhale. So as such, Chayis Ratzo v'shuv, the Chayis Aliki, the divine energy is a state of Ratzo v'shuv, which means it is constantly in a process of a flow, and then return, continued flow, and that creates the divisions and the gradations and the segments of what defines time itself. As he explained, with the past being like the histalkus, the withdrawal or the contraction, the future is the upcoming expansion, or in the context of contraction and expansion of the heart, expansion, expression. And then specifically, each flow also constitutes a particular configuration. The Yud Beis Sirufe of Havaya and Adnai. So every hour, every moment is a particular flow of that energy. So even though the energy in general is Ratzo v'shuv, but like he said, Klolos HaChayis is for Ratzo v'shuv, but b'chol rega nimshach tzirav chadash. Not a different configuration, not this configuration that was there before. And therefore, at the end of the day, that's what constitutes the distinction of time. So we come from a continuum, an Ein Sof continuum, a state of continuity and timelessness, through this Ratzo v'shuv process, comes into a structured time. But all this was meant to set the stage to understand that we have access. Once God created existence in time and space, he gave us the ability to access levels that are higher than time and space, namely through Torah and mitzvahs. And that's where this all began. This maimer of the Alter Rebbe, as the Rebbe Rashab elaborated, all began by explaining that this is the structure of the spheres, the 9 spheres. But there's a level above them. It's called Keser, or we call ratzon. especially Primius ratzon. That is Lamayla Mazman B'chol Parsuf. In every structure, Kesser of that structure is a state that's higher than time. And that's what he's going to address now. He's going to start talking about the ratzon that's higher than the structure of time. But before we go there, I do want to say two things, just to fill in the gaps, some points that were discussed, not completely discussed. I said I would explain the difference between Seder Zmanim and Zmanim. Even though I believe it's going to be discussed later, I'll just say one thing. I already said it, but I'll say it more specifically. Just like we say fire and water originate, or water and fire originate from Chesed and Gvura, obviously in Chesed and Gvura it doesn't have the shape and form and the properties of water and fire, but it's an archetype. The similar properties, just like water runs downward, Chesed runs downward, kindness. Fire rises, Gvura rises. Just as Chesed expands things, water expands things. Fire concentrates things, constricts things. Same thing with Gvura. So the archetype begins in a level that is not yet, you can't really define it like in physical time and space as we would define fire and water. And the same thing with every detail of existence, every fiber of existence has a spiritual source. So Zman too, when we say past, present, and future as we know it, yesterday, today, and tomorrow, that originates from the Gedima Ve'ichur, from the hierarchy and the hierarchy and the sequence of spiritual levels that Chachma precedes Bina. So there, preceding doesn't mean preceding in time, it's preceding in concept. It's a conceptual precedent, it's a conceptual hierarchy. So Seder Zmanim is generally understood as being the root of time in Bria, where time actually begins. You have Seder Zmanim, the concept and the archetype of time. Higher than Atzilus, you don't even have that. So essentially, it's a progression, level by level by level. Now, there's more to say about this as well. I mentioned there's a mimer from the Alter Rebbe in Tovkuf Samach Tes. This is the Alter Rebbe's mimer. Actually, it's a Samach Tzedek's mimer based on the Alter Rebbe's mimer. If you want to look it up, you can look it up. It's on page 281, where he discusses this in more detail. If you may recall, I mentioned the Shulchan Aruch of the Alter Rebbe, asking the question, when we keep Shabbos, down below, Shabbos above is higher than time. So when does Shabbos begin? In Israel, Shabbos begins 7 hours before it does in New York, 10 hours before California, LA. Shabbos is over, and it's still Shabbos in many parts of the world. So when you took Lamaila, when is Shabbos? When is Sunday? When is Monday? We say Zman Krishma, or Zman of Tikkun Chatzos. That's what the Alter Rebbe specifically brings it. So when we are saying it below, where does it align with? If it's completely beyond time, why can't you say Shema anytime? Why can't you keep Shabbos 24/7, any time of the year, any time of the week? So he explains that Lamaila, it's an Aruchnizdika level, it's above time, but then it like channels into each part of the world into its particular time. You know, when I first explained it, I gave a simple example. You know, I don't know if you remember when we were children, they used to have used to get, let's say, coins for Hanukkah geld or something. We had a bunch of coins. They had these coin sorters where you put the coins into one big funnel, and then based on the shape of the coins, the quarters went into one, what do we call it? Whatever you want to call it.
Cylinder, column.
Shano.
One cylinder, fine. One cylinder. I was thinking one tube, cylinder. The dimes went into another one, the nickels in another, the pennies in another. So in a sense, when you put it, before it breaks down, it's a general energy in basically Atzilus. And then as it starts, the so-called manifesting in the material worlds or in the lower worlds, it starts taking on the shape. And therefore, when Shabbos is based on, because of the obviously the earth cycle and the way existence is not flat and so on, you have to say Shabbos will begin different times because the sun sets at different places. So in each place, according to that place. But in this mimer of the Samach Tzedek, he asks a question, where's the bridge between the higher than time and the time? At the end of the day, the question just carries over. So fine, you found a way to explain how it goes from we'll call it a continuum into structured time. But there's still that gap that it has to leap. So he explains in this mimer the idea, what I just discussed briefly, that first you have chesed, gvura, teferes, and that ultimately will turn into structural, we'll call them cylinders if you wish, that will become the time zones that will allow the Shabbos to manifest in each place according to its time. So it's just, this doesn't change much in what we're learning. I just wanted to add in case you wanted to analyze and get a better picture of time. That's one point I wanted to make. Another
I still
thing,
think that there is missing something in ACS to explain.
I just gave you a mimer to read and learn.
Yeah, I understand, but still,
I would suggest learning the mimer, and let's see if you come up with an understanding. The mimer discusses it in detail. It's
because
not a
even
long
in
mimer.
Chesed, the Milo, it's also Zman. There is Zman there also.
4-page mimer. I'm sorry?
Even in Chesed de la Milo, which is the Seder Zmanim, there is Zman. There is Zman. We don't call it Zman, but there is Zman there.
I don't know what you're talking about. What do you mean Zman? There's no yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Chesed shines every day.
Okay.
This is what's called conceptual time. It's called conceptual time, not actual time. So that's in other words, okay, that mimer can help if you want to look deeper into it. Okay, that's one thing I wanted to say. A second thing is, I wrote an essay, if you like, I can post it, about this whole idea of why the world wasn't created earlier. There are actually 3 explanations given in Kabbalah and by the Jewish philosophers. That Samach Tzedek brings them all in Sefer Achkira. He has a sefer called Sefer Achkira. And so years ago, there was a discussion. So I wrote a whole essay on it. If you like, I can post that. That's the second thing I wanted to add. And finally, what was the third thing I wanted to add? I don't remember now. Okay, it'll come to me. Good. Okay, so now let's continue learning from where we are on page 59. Middle of the page, new paragraph. Pages can be found at samachvav.com. Omnom. Now, by contrast, however, bechinas ratzon shebechol elam hu lamayla bechinas hazman shaloi. So remember, every world, which means every dimension, has a ratzon. As we learned, the kesser of every level, let's say the kesser of chachma, is the ratzon for chachma, God's desire for chachma. The kesser of bina is God's desire for bina. Kesser of atzilus is God's desire, ratzon for atzilus. Kesser of bria, God's desire for bria. And we learned earlier that the kesser of every level is higher than the level itself. Like we said, the difference between the faculties of chachma and bina and ratzon is that ratzon, all it is just an expression of the soul. Netiyas hanefesh, if you remember, hatiyas hanefesh. We're going back now to page 55. And that's when he went over from that to explain that it's higher than time. So time is the structure of the spheres. The keser, or the rotzah, is higher than the zman of that particular olam. Hine, and now he's going to explain the understanding, the logic of it, based on the Ratzo v'shuv we just discussed. We'll understand why. It's not just a technicality that Kesser happens to be higher than time, and Chachma is within conceptual time or actual time. It's because one of them is closer to godliness and one is closer to existence. So the levels that are closer to existence, the Ratzo v'shuv is far more prominent there. Whereas the levels that are closer to the divine, the Ratzo v'shuv is not there. That's what he's going to explain right now. And just to give the example before we read inside, remember the chief of staff. I gave the example of ratzon for the chief of staff. Chief of staff's job is to be always at the side of the king, of the leader. Whatever he wants, the chief of staff conveys to the appropriate parties, to the appropriate department heads, to the appropriate cities, communities, municipalities, whatever it may be. But his job is just the oyer that reflects, expresses the ratzon, that expresses the etzem. Chacham and Bina are already department heads. They have a function. They're still coming from the nefesh. They're still obviously all subjects and completely bottle. And their role is to fulfill the king's will. But it's the king's will in Chachma and Bina and all the details that we learned on page 55 and on. So based on that, you're going to see the difference why there's Ratzo v'shuv in one and not Ratzo v'shuv in the other. Dehine, because now, Inyan Ratzo v'shuv hu keshachayes u'bchinis gilim im keireh. Ratzo v'shuv is only possible in a situation where the chayes, the energy, is already revealed from the source. And remember, those are the koiches. When it came to ratzon, if you remember, he called it nelam. It's still concealed. It's still like the light within the sun. Umaruchik mimkere, and is distant from the source, meaning it's already moved away from the source. So the energy that's flowing from the source, being that it is a oyer that's connected to the source, so there's a ratzo v'shuv, umislabish b'klei mugbal, and that energy manifests and enclosed within a contained and confined container. So there's Ratzo v'shuv. What's the Ratzo v'shuv? The energy wants to go back to its source, but then it's told to go back and return shuv to manifest and give chayas. That's the essence of the Ratzo v'shuv, as we'll soon learn. And now he goes back to the moshel of the Alter Rebbe. If you remember, what was the moshel that he used? You remember the letters of thought. Remember, the nefesh itself is higher than thought, higher than any faculty. But then, nefesh mole asius, the nefesh is filled with letters, but they're not actual letters yet. It's just the potential to express itself. It's a nefesh, an expressible nefesh. Remember, a nefesh that's expressed itself. But he called nefesh memalola, a speaking soul, meaning a soul that can communicate. So he said that there were levels. If you remember, 3 levels, he said. There's the way the machshava is in the nefesh. There's the way the isis and machshava begin to take on shape. Not take on shape, I'm sorry. Begin to take on form. That they're actual thought. And then how the nefesh, how the machshava takes on a tzir, mugbal, actually defined shape and form. Ukamoshel isis and machshava hanal. Like the example that he gave before, the letters of thought. And he tells us where, page 52. You want to go back to page 52 to refresh yourself? You can look there. I'm looking myself just to refresh my own memory. Okay. Right. B'chinas machshava atzma v'hagbolas machshava. He spoke about 2 levels. The thought itself, there's an active thought, not just the power of thought within the soul, and then there's hagbolas machshava, the parameters of that thought. He spoke about those 2 levels very explicitly before. The machshava atzma, the thought itself, hainu machshava b'gilish cheshav inyan, meaning there's a revealed thought that is actually thinking about a particular subject. Machshava. It's now Metzias Machshava. It's no longer in the source, the pure source. It's an existing thought. Not like the power of thought that's still encompassed and still immersed, I would say basically You're still encompassed within the source canal, as we learned earlier. And certainly the parameters of the thought, meaning the actual words or letters or structure of the thought. That's mamish ha-metzias murgish. It's not as sensed as letters of speech, and that are definitely not like letters of in writing, but it's definitely compared to the soul. It's an absolutely palpable reality, the thought. So now going back, that's the muscle. The kamay kain hu ba'oir. How does that apply to oir? Same thing with the oir, with the divine energy. Commotion is bar l'il. That the oir is also no longer as it is within the sun, within the source. The oir is now a mitzias oir. He called it clearly a mitzias of oir. And the oir manifests, and especially once it comes in takeli. Once you're in that state, you're now no longer purely in the source. Then you could say there's a tshuka, there's a longing and a yearning to be encompassed in the source. Because if you're in the source, there's no need for a ratzo to yearn to enter back, to return to the source. But here in this case, since it's distant, it's already removed somewhat from the source. He yearns to be encompassed and be absorbed in the source. And he wants to leave, exit, free himself, this level of energy from the gvul, where it's now manifest, because it had manifested in a particular structure, and to be encompassed into its source. That's the tenu of ratzon. That's the movement of a ratzon, of a yearning. Now it's true when it comes, we spoke about this, when it came to the, let's say, the circulation of blood, or for that matter, breath, you may not see that so obviously. The heart, when it contracts, it's not necessarily because the blood feels it has to go back to its source because it's hungry. But if you think about it, you could say that, because it has to go back to the source to get refreshed. Same thing with breath. If you, for example, inhale, you just hold your breath, at some point, you're going to have to give up because you need a fresh breath of air. So though it's not necessarily a divine longing, meaning you're longing to connect to the divine, but you're definitely longing to connect to the source. I'm just adding this on my own. He doesn't say this explicitly, but it just helps us understand it. But Lamaila, for sure, it's clear. Because the whole point of the Oir's Ratzo V'Shuv is, one of the reasons is exactly this. If you remember at the bottom of page 58, he said that why the Oir is in a state of Ratzo. This is definitely one of the reasons. There are other reasons given, by the way, for Ratzo V'Shuv. But right now, this is the reason he's using here. So clearly, Ratzo V'Shuv is applicable when the Oir is already removed or somewhat removed or outside of its source. What's that? I'll take questions in a moment. Let me just finish the entire section here. Let's just see how far he goes. Okay. V'zein harotze shereitze lotzes min hakeli chulu. Well, I would continue. If somebody wants to ask something, I'm fine with stopping right here, because we could take a break here, even though he's still in the middle of the topic. But if somebody wants to ask something, and they're, please.
I have a question that's been gnawing at me. The idea of Ratzo V'Shuv is, as we see examples of it through all of existence, and we refer to it as breath, as life, that the whole universe seems to be pulsing with this energy. Is it at all conceivable to say that some level of Ratzo V'Shuv could also exist in Atzmos, in the Makor? Obviously, just as
he just basically negated that very possibility.
Well, we like just as the rays of the sun do exist in the sun, could there possibly be not recognizable, not distinguishable,
So
not separate?
first of all, God is not like the sun. The sun is a defined creation called a luminary, a source of light. Secondly, my instincts are it would be completely negatable because Atmos doesn't even have light. You can't even call Atmos Ur, let alone Ratzo V'Shuv. Atmos you can't even call a Ma'ir if you're really talking about in the source. So I would be careful for saying that. I'm not sure why you're even pushing to what's compelling you to say that. Right
Well,
now,
because
he's clearly saying even Kesser.
right, yes.
He's coming to tell you that Kesser doesn't even have Ratzo V'Shuv.
What would compel me to say that is it in some way binds us even more to the source of all, to Osmos.
Doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. Then you'd say that what? Then a frog and a tree and a flower should also be an Atmos, and then we are mamish united.
Well,
And we don't say that. Atmos is beyond any definition and beyond any expression. He has the power to create all of that. But you're asking a different question. You're asking a question, why don't you just say God is all? Everything in existence defines God. But we know that God is beyond all that.
Right, but can't the paradigm for everything else somehow exist somehow in some very sublime state?
The whole basis of Chassidus is to come to learn that that if you ever learn any Maimarim, it always asks this question: how could you say midas by Hashem? Because then you have major problems. Ani Hashem le'shanisi. God is immutable, never changing. He's timeless. He's seamless. He's shapeless. How do you apply Chesed to Hashem, Gvura to Hashem? How can you say there's a Shinei ratzon? Now, when you daven and you're asking Hashem, let's say for a refuah shlema, that God says, okay, I'll grant you a refuah shlema. How could you speak about Shinei ratzon? I don't know if you're familiar with it, but this Chassidus is a major theme.
Yes.
And there are hundreds and hundreds of pages discussing this question.
Yes,
And clearly they don't just say, oh, okay, no problem. Atzmus has it all, and that's that. And that's why actually we have Ur. And that's why we have all the levels of the spheres and so on, and the different opinions to come to explain that all of them do not affect Atzmus.
Yes.
They're all expressions. They're basically like light that comes from a source. But it's an whole other discussion which really doesn't belong here at all.
Okay,
just for the record.
Just one parting comment on that. We do subscribe taiva to Atzmos, though. We do.
So at this point, I have to say this is not in the scope of our class.
Okay.
So I would just say it's a good question, something you should address at a time which doesn't distract from what we're learning right here.
Got it. Thank you.
Sure. Okay.
I'm a little confused myself about this concept of that the Ratzo results from what's been extended, seeking to return to its source. I certainly understand that is true for godly light, like a neshama and a goof. That to me makes perfect sense. It wants to go back to where it came from because where it is present is not its natural environment. That kind of Ratzo I get, but here he seems to be making some more general claim that that's just in the nature of anything that pulses.
Yeah, exactly. Just like a neshama wants to go back to the source, every wants to go back to the source where it comes from.
Every but not everything that pulses. Is he talking only about
One second, what means everything that pulses? He's only talking about and chayas here.
Okay.
He's talking about v'chayas Ratzo V'Shuv.
I see. Okay.
He's talking about and chayas.
Okay. Fair enough.
Well, I already qualified and explained how that would apply to blood, to the pumping of the heart, the contraction, the Ratzo V'Shuv in the heart or in breath. So I did address that before.
All of this has nothing to do with Atmos.
I don't know what you mean by Atmos here. What do you mean by Atmos?
Atmos and mehus. Oyer is already made birtzoinoi.
He's talking about Zman right now. Zman, Rotze, Veshuv. He's saying Kesed is even higher. So Atzmus for sure he's not talking about.
But he also used the mashal of machshava, and I don't see how the machshava. He referred to page 52, and he talked. There's the osios and
Yeah, that's the example of Ur coming from the source being the nefesh. The machshav is like the Ur coming from the nefesh.
But once the thought is out, it doesn't seek to return to its source.
You're asking a different question now.
No, he used that mashal. That's what confused me.
That's not just the mashal. That's the mashal in the mimer. But he doesn't use that mashal for Ratzo and Shuv. He uses that mashal to explain Ur and Etzem.
Okay. Thank you. That's my confusion. Thank you.
And maybe that applies there too. I have not seen that yet. We'll see. We'll see. We'll see. Let's see. Let's continue reading. Not finished yet. So therefore, Rotze applies clearly what he calls the Ur that's outside of the source. It's already serving its function. And it's yearning and longing to return to the source because it's meruchik memkere. Ubishol sheyetza adayin hu bekeli. And at the time that the Ur is experiencing Ratze, it's still in the container. When you see that contraction expansion, for example, that's actively happening, especially when we're talking about the Ur, as the Ur has manifest, and now the Ur is so-called receding and withdrawing back, hu b'chinas nifrid. And at that point, it's in a state of somewhat separate. You have to say somewhat because it's not completely separate, obviously, because the Ur is still flowing from the source. However, it's flowed outside of the source, and it's now being drawn back and longing to be drawn back into the source. Ma'achas shu ros. Because ma'achas, considering the fact shehu rotz, that it's in a state of rotz, literally means to run, but he means they're in a state of movement. The eich shaykh merutza la'achi yitziyose min hagvul shenichlu b'mkere. So if you were to say, you cannot say there's a merutza. Merutza means there's merutza is like, when I say merutza is
advance.
More than that, merutza like the word zerem. There's when you say there's the water is flowing in a certain direction, and it's being tugged in that direction. What do we call that? A tide?
A current.
Maybe a current. Yeah. So if it's already left the gvul to be encompassed in the makkah, you can't call it a merutza. However, when it's in the container, so then it has a sense of feeling that it wants to be drawn into the source. And it's distant from Mekere, or Shayach HaRatze. So bottom line is he's saying that Ratze is only possible when there's a state that you're not in the source. Because if you're in the source, then there should be total calm and peace. There's no need for Ratze. It's only when it's a state that is somewhat outside of it, the source. Now, why he elaborates so much, not sure. Like, why did he need these last three lines? He said it already, yes, technically. I guess he wants to emphasize that the Ratze is happening in the Keli, not outside of the Keli. It's, in other words, I mean, I can use a simple practical example that works very well, which makes total sense, because this is somewhat abstract. The example I've given in the past is a shliach and the Rebbe. There's an actual story where the Rebbe sent, I mean, people, of course, he sent many shluchim. There's a shliach years ago, in the early years, he wanted to come back to New York as many times as possible to be near the Rebbe for inspiration and so on. He missed being in the source. Let's put it that way. The Oyer had a ratzon to come to the source. Rabbi Chadakov, the Rebbe's chief of staff secretary, saw him and said that the Rebbe is asking, why do we always see you here in New York? Why aren't you in the Mokkam HaShlichus? You should be where you're supposed to be, working there. So he said, I come here to get inspiration, to get strength, to gather energy and resources, so then I could do my work properly. Anyway, he told him, your job is to be there, not here. Okay, Kachava, so happened. So that's what he did. He listened, as difficult as it was. Anyway, months passed. One day he gets a phone call from Rabbi Chadakov. The Rebbe is asking, how come we never see you? So he says to Rabbi Chadakov, the Rebbe told me, the Rebbe told me that I have to be my place of shlichus and not be here. So Rabbi Chadakov answered him, you have to be where you are, but you have to want to be here. So wherever, when possible, and in a practical way, obviously you can't leave your shlichus every second day or every week, but as much as possible, where it makes sense, you should come back, and you should want to come back. So in other words, the whole point is, in the Neshama it says, Al korchach atachai. That's what it says in the Mishnah. A Neshama doesn't want to come to this world. Why would it want to come to this world? Look at this world. Just give one look. If your soul saw this world before it came to this world and didn't yet have any of the benefits of mitzvahs and so on, it looks at this world, who wants to come to a corrupt world? War, death, disease, greed, inhumanity. I mean, I don't want to go through the whole list. That can be so depressing. Why would a neshama in Gan Eden, where it's living peacefully, calmly, there's no acrimony, there's no selfishness, there's no injustice, duplicity, etc. Why would I want to come here? But Hashem says to the neshama, Al korchach atachai. You must go down. I'm compelling you against your will, against your comfort zone. Once the neshama comes down below, the Mishnah continues and says, Al korchach atames. And now you're compelled, after 120 years, to return. So the obvious question, one second. The neshama didn't want to come down in the first place. Why do you have to now compel it to return? It should want to run back as soon as possible. Because once a neshama chassidus explains, tastes Torah mitzvahs, and understands that that's the kavanah atzmis, so the ratzon is its nature. That's its comfort zone, is to go and be encompassed in the source. But the kavanah atzmis is much deeper than its nature. And it came to realize that that's what atzmus wants. So its bittul was so much that it's ready to forego its own comfort. And now, once it's doing Torah mitzvahs, yafa shah achas b'tshuva ma'asim tevim be'elam hazem kol chaya elam haba. 1 hour of tshuva ma'asim tevim in this world is more precious, more beautiful, yafa, than the entire chaya elam haba, the entire elam haba, not just 1 hour of elam haba. When it comes to nachas ruach and the pleasure of the soul, yafa shah achas shal keiras ruach, 1 hour of pleasure in elam haba is worth more than all the pleasure in this world. But when it comes to yafa shah achas b'tshuva, by the Eibishter's nachas ruach, what God wants, what Atzmus wants. Atzmus wants the avodah down below. Yes, where it's not comfortable, where neshama doesn't naturally want to be. But should the neshama lose its sensitivity when it comes down below and say, you know what? Hashem wants me to be here. Let me make the best of it and live a very comfortable life. Yes, live a comfortable life, al pi Torah. But always know you have to still remember you want to be close to Elokus, Begoli, even when you're in this world. So that's why the neshama remains restless and the ratzon remains forever, even when it comes down below. Yes, it needs al korchach atamos because the neshama appreciates the avodah that it does down here. But the neshama never loses the ner Hashem nishma sodam, the flame, as he explains in Tanya chapter 19. A flame always seeks to defy gravity. It always longs to reach its source. In that sense, it's a dual situation going on here. So what he's saying here, and in this context of Avodah, this makes it's a lot easier to understand what the Rebbe Rashab is saying. Basically saying Ratzo is only possible where there's some distance. If you're in the source and you're sitting in Gan Eden and so on, okay, maybe there's a Ratzo there to get to higher levels of Elikus. But for all practical purposes, if you're basking in the glow of the divine, then why would there be a Ratzo? You're right in the source. When you come down, once you're in the Keli, and the Ur is in the Keli, Meruchik Memkeri, like he said. And not just Meruchik Memkeri, it's still in the Keli. Because once it's outside of the Keli, then why would it need a Merutza? There's no that current, that drive, that passion. Passion comes from sense of distance. If things are very comfortable, there's no passion. Why would the soul be passionate? This passion of Ratzo that the soul has, Lotzeis min hakeli, is only kishiyotza dain, kishiyotza from the mocker, and meruchik b'mkeri oshaych haratze. Okay, just to explain a bit what we're learning here. He still hasn't gotten back to Keser and Ratzon, but he's explained where this Ratzo v'shuv takes place, what's location. Let me continue reading, and then I'll stop after this whole section. Hopefully, not sure how much more he's going to go with this, but let's see. But I will stop if anybody wants to ask anything about what I just explained or discussed. Any questions? The Klolas Inyan Haratze, continuing on. We're like 6 lines from the bottom of the page. Now, in general, this Ratze, this yearning, this longing, and now I'm using those words explicitly. Earlier we learned Ratze, we were thinking contraction. We talked about withdrawal. We talked about what else did I use? I used a few other expressions. I think, the word also recession, receding, because that was in the movement of its being drawn back into its source. Now we're talking about the cause behind it. He clearly is calling it a Ratze, and it said Semoyen. He doesn't say it's Semoyen yet, but he definitely said Mishtekik, a yearning and longing. It says V'klolasin haratze u'b'pchinis istalkus. And in general, this Ratze, the general idea of the Ratze is a stalkus. Now, stalkus, again, can be withdrawal, can be receding or recession. It can be concealment even. It could be, we talked earlier about running to and fro. So the ebb and flow, the ebb. The legabe hakeli vadahu b'chinas istalkus. He's now going to break this down even further. Compared to the container where the energy entered, let's say neshama in the guf, or the blood into the bloodstream, into the arteries, or the breath into the lungs and into our entire system. So legabi the keli, it's certainly histalkus. When you're exhaling, or the heart is contracting, or the energy is receding, from the point of view of keli, right now, all that is leaving the keli. So it's for sure histalkus. Like it says elsewhere. Let me just see. I'm interested to see what it says there. I'll look it up later. Omnom hu b'chinas histalkus legaba gamkein. The Rebbe Rashab says, however, the histalkus is not just compared to the keli, it's also compared to the ur. The ma'achas shemislabish ba'keli harihu meruchak min ha'etzem. Being that the ur itself also entered into the keli, and I'm just thinking, I'm visualizing the air in the lungs, or the blood that was expanded, the heart expanded, and the blood that spread into the bloodstream. I'm using physical examples just to have something that we can tangibly relate to. I'm not sure it's going to work. We'll see. So also the oir, not just the keli, harihu meruchik min ha'etzem. The oir is now distant from the etzem. The blood is no longer in the heart. The air that you're breathing, the oxygen is no longer in its source. It's now within the system, within your kelim. V'harihu b'chinas mehus achar. And it became a mehus achar. Like we learned earlier about oir, it's not the oir the way it is in its source. It's a different personality. It takes on a different personality. It's still an expression of the source, but it's a mehus achar. It's take on a different mehus achar. If you remember, he said mehus nifred and a mehus achar. I'm going back to page 52. He made that very, very clear. Mehus 53, page 53 rather. Mehus achar.
He also said it on 52.
Yeah. But especially in 53, I see he explained it with the Alter Rebbe's Lashon there. Okay. Good. So some husachar, dahari bizgalus hariu nasa b'bchinas mitziyaser. Because once it becomes revealed, it became mitziyaser, like he said earlier. The sunlight, the light within the sun, doesn't have the same property as sunlight outside of the sun. If you want to talk about sunlight that's going to have the effect of warming and illuminating anything outside of the sun, that's a Metzias oir called oir. Ubafrat. Ubafrat hagaven shenasa b'yadei hakeli. If you remember earlier, he also brought the example of the color, the tubes, the tinted tubes that apply, that the colorless liquid assumes that color. So even though water, for example, is colorless, you put it in a blue tube, the water is going to look blue. The water will look blue. So the Gevin Shanasa B'Yadei Keli, the Keli causes a color, some shape and form within the Ur. So not only the Ur became a Mitzvah Ur, the Keli has also given it even more form and shape. The Mishum Zeh B'chinas Mehus Nifred Canal. Right? He goes back now, not just Mehus Acher, but Mehus Nifred. That's why it's not just another Mehus, it's also a separate Mehus, because now it's assumed a particular defined properties. Chochmah, Bina. V'im Kain. So all this is to make the case that the Histalkus and the Ratzo is not just from the point of view of the Keli, but also from the point of view of the Oir. V'im Kain ba'Ratzo hu b'chinas Histalkus m'melhus l'mehus. So therefore the Ratzo, the Oir wants to go back to his state before it was impacted by the Keli. As important as it is, the Oir itself, not just the Keli is not feeling the Oir itself feels separate to some extent, and it wants to return, and therefore it's a Histalkus b'mehus l'mehus, the mehus achar, because it's taken on a new shape, a different shape. Let's not say the word new, a different and separate shape.
Shape or identity.
Meaning a mehus dover that's not commensurate to what it was in its original state and what it has become. So the Oir itself is experiencing a somewhat of a, if you want, a disorientation here, and that's the Ratzo is to return it back to its original state. Aliyah. And that, from the point of view of the Oir, is an aliyah. It's an elevation. It's not just going back, just like, for example, let's say water, the waves wash up water on the sea, on the beach rather, and then the water recedes. It's the same water. Here, the Oir has been affected in some extent. And I don't want to even use the word affected, maybe too strong of a word. But the Oir is sensing a distance, and therefore the Histalkus is also the Gab of the Oir, and that's called an Aliyah. Shenetak b'muhus u'metzias el mekere. That is separate, it's netak. It's being disconnected from. The muhus u'metzias that it has manifested in, el mekere, to its source. In the footnote, it brings from the Alter Rebbe's Naimer where he uses the expression, memuhusei u'metziusei. The Rebbe Rashab just says Mamuhusa Metzius. There it says Mamuhusa Metziuse. It's just two different ways of expressing it. That you can explain why the Rebbe Rashab is saying Mahusa Metzius. But bottom line is that there is a Mahus Mahus experience here, where I gave the example before of the Shliach and the Rebbe, a student who became a great teacher himself. So when he's with his students, he's teaching. Then when he goes back and he yearns and longs to go back to his master, to his teacher, and he's in his presence, it's not like, oh, everything's regular. It's a different experience. Not just is he refreshed, he's going back, so to speak, to the source of his own wellsprings, which would be his source. So even though his shlichus is to be now a mo'er, a teacher, and a ur to those that are receiving from him, but for the ur itself, it's a somewhat of a metaphor. I don't want to use the metamorphosis, maybe also too strong, but it's definitely a transitional experience that he's talking about. This ratze that we're talking about. The whole point of all of this exercise is to demonstrate how deep ratze and shuv exists in the level of the ur, in the level of the spheres, which will teach us the contrast, how much it doesn't exist in the level of keser. All this is coming to explain the necessity and the key role. Because in the source, it's not a mehus klal lefierach. Commensurately speaking, proportionately speaking, there is not at all a mehus when it's back in its own source. All this is the ratze that exists outside of the source. And he did elaborate. Be interesting. I want to go back to see the Alter Rebbe's Maimer. I know that he brings some of this, but clearly the Rebbe Rashab elaborated more and more. But now, once he's established this, he's going to go back now to ratzon, the contrast where there is no ratze, meaning higher than zman, keser. But let me stop if there are any questions for what we've learned just now.
Why do you have to say that the whole entire thing is going about oil? It seems to me that he's talking here that when it is in the keli, then it's higher the inyan horotzoi. So, but in the oil,
first of all, the answer is because it says hachayis rotze v'shuv. So right away, the mere fact that's the whole proof. There's rotze and shuv altogether in ur, because it says hachayis. Chayis is ur. That the chayis is in a state of contraction and expansion, not the keli. Of course, it's connected to the keli because that's where it all happens. But the ur itself is manifests itself in that type of a dual property, what we call an oscillating, a dual rhythm. That's he made that very clear. The reason I explained a few classes back why that's important, because it makes the interface between existence and Elikuz deeper. Because if the ur itself has a rotze v'shuv, it means we have something to ride on. So even the keli can also so-called be elevated through the rotze v'shuv of the ur, and ultimately back to the source. That would be my explanation for it. But it's clearly in the ur itself, not just in the keli. That's for sure.
but from the words here, אומנם הוא בבחינת הסתלקות לגבי האויר גם כן, דשמאחר שנשלבש בכלי, הרי הוא מרוחק מן העצם.
Because the ur is impacted. Look, when the blood runs, when the heart contracts, and the blood runs into your veins, it's not just the veins, the keli, also the ur is now separate from the heart. Relatively speaking. Lamaila, for sure that's the case. Because the Ur HaChochmeh, for example, if you go back, look, it's quite basic. If you go back to what we learned on page 53 and 54 and so on, you'll see the point is quite clear. God created an existence, and he wanted Chochmah not to be ratzon. Simple as that. Chochmah is supposed to do its job. It's the head of a department. Let's say it's the head of the postal department. It's the head of the defense. It's head of finance minister. The chief of staff's role is whatever God wants. So you have to go back, before we talk about Ratzo v'Shuv, just go back to the initial point. The initial point is there are levels in Elikus that all they are just an expression of the divine. You're talking about Erein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum is for sure like that. But we're not even going that high. Ratzon is an example for that. And then there are levels of the divine that are divine attributes like Chachma, Bina, Chesed, Gvura. They're still divine. No one said they're not divine, but they are now shaped and formed. They have a particular function. And as he explained at length what that meant, the function. That's why it's called a mehus achar, a mehus nifrad. You cannot say that on Ratzon. So once you understand that, then the Ratzon makes total sense. So Keser, we'll soon learn about Keser and Ratzon. But that this Chachma Bina and this levels that he's talking about, Eiris and Kalim, not just the Kali, the Eir itself senses. I gave the example of a Shliach. The Shliach is an Eir, he's not a Kali. He's going to Kalim. He has a body, of course, and he has his own Kalim. But he's going to live in a city, but his neshama is very much connected to his Rebbe. And he wants to go back as much as possible. Like the neshama wants to constantly elevate al karcha chatachai. Neshama wants to continuously. Neshama is an Ur, not a Keli. The Guf is the Keli. So from the Guf's point of view, for sure Ratze is a Ratze. But even the Ur also goes in a state of Ratze because the Neshama does feel a distance and wants to reconnect to its source. And that's the point here, that this is a level that Ur, as it manifests within Ishtalshalus, where Ratze v'Shuv plays a tremendous role in the back and forth of the contraction, expansion, or receding and extending, and all the other examples we spoke about, tension and resolution, etc. Okay. Any other questions?
Even the neshama is affected by mikrei haguf as well.
Absolutely, that is correct. It's affected by the experiences of the body. We learned that in Ayin Beis, at the end of Ayin Beis, but also in many places. Yeah, absolutely. And in general, the neshama has tsar, it has pain. I mean, the neshama is affected. The nefesh elikis manifests inside the nefesh habamis. It's not aloof and separate from it.
What did he add here that's not in pages 52 to 53? How Ratzo v'Shuv operates within the context of something that's been extended from a source?
I would wait and see till he finishes the whole subject to see how he ties it all together again to answer that.
Okay.
Since he's in the middle of it still, I'd continue learning, seeing how he explains it. It will become, I believe, clear.
For everyone's sake, in the WhatsApp group, I just posted an explanation from ChatGPT about this. I found this, on the one hand, I don't say obvious, but I feel like he already explained it. On the other hand, I feel confused by it. I think you did a great job explaining it. You answered my questions. Nothing wrong with your explaining it, but it was choppy. Anyways, I just did something for people if they want to look at it.
I'll just qualify, even if I appreciate what you did, but just remember ChatGPT can also confuse matters and it's not always accurate. So just keep that as a important.
Yeah, of course. I read it. It's consistent with everything you just explained.
So be it. But okay. I'll look at it myself. But just know that because we're learning it inside here. As I said, if anybody has any questions, by all means, I'm right here.
Yeah, I can remove it if you don't like it. I think you're going to say it's fine. It says what you said.
No. As long as you have the qualification, it's fine. Everybody can read it and see what they see. It's fine. If it could help, by all means. Okay, Mashenkein. Let's just read a few more lines in contrast. This is all Zman Shaloi, the level B'chol Eilam Zman. Mashenkein B'china Sheder Shemakra Achayis. Next page, 60. By contrast, the sheirish mokar hachaya shel ha'olam is the root and source of the vitality of existence. The reishis hamshachase, at the beginning, at the top, the head of its transmission, which is what? Haynu b'chinas haratzon. Now we're talking about keser, ratzon. So on the next page, 60, she'eina nimshach kol kach li is b'chinas richuk, or b'chinas nifred klal kanal, which does not extend, does not transmit that distant and that separate at all, canal. Now, why does he say nimshach kol kach? Because at the end of the day, it's still amshachet. Ratzon is still not nefesh. If you remember, he made it clear that as much as the nefesh expresses the soul, it's not the soul. And the same thing with as much as even the highest levels of express the etzem, it's not etzem. And it's only the beginning, the reishis, it's only the first step of the transmission from the source. And it's still in a state of b'chinas helamadayim. Like we learned earlier, it's still in a state of concealment. You can't call it a mitzias of gilui, a revealed state. Shu b'chinas iskalus ba'mokar adayim, which means that it's still encompassed within the source, still encompassed in the source. So here, loy shayich ba'inyan hamerutza. Here you cannot say that there's a current, that there's a passion, there's a rush. I'm still looking for another word. I can't seem to put my finger on it. Marutza is when let's say, when water is rushing very quickly in a current is the right word, but there's a stronger word. Anyway, not shaykh in marutza. Ma'achas shalei nisracha klal, because it never got distant. Marutza comes from richuk. It only comes when there's something that's lacking.
Longing.
Well, we spoke longing, yeah. And it's not yet a separate personality and substance and existence. Therefore, you cannot speak about rotze there, about a yearning and longing. But because mashanim sas, since there is some extension, because it is a ratzon at the end of the day, it's something that is expressing the soul's wish, desire, and therefore, because of that, it also returns and gets encompassed, but not in a state of rotze. The kol so now he's adding that even this level has some subtle form of return as well, because since it's nimshach tzas, as we discussed earlier, because it's at least the chief of staff is still not the king. He's still one step below the king. So since there's some hamshacha, therefore it returns, because every that's a hamshacha needs to also go back into his skalus. Hine nikra b'chinazu mati v'lei mati. So now he's going to introduce a new concept. Mati v'lei mati. This is called mati v'lei mati. This is an Aramaic term in Zayar, where he's going to teach here mispashet ve'ena mispashet. In Samach Tzedek and other places they teach negeya v'lei negeya ve'ena negeya. There's different translations for it, but I'm going to use obviously the Rebbe Rashab's translation. So what does moti v'lei moti mean? Very interesting concept. On one hand, it sounds like Ratzo v'shuv. Moti means mispashet, it extends, ve'ena mispashet, and it doesn't extend. But you see, Ratzo v'shuv is two movements. One is receding or contracting, and one is expanding or expression. Moti v'lei moti, it's mispashet v'lei mispashet, means it's somewhat extended, but immediately it returns. It's just like a sliver of movement, if you want to put it in very simple English. We're going to discuss this more at length, obviously.
It's not a full extension.
Yeah. I'm going to give many examples there are many examples for this. But this is not Ratzo v'shuv. Ratzo v'shuv is a full-blown dual movement, oscillating dual rhythm, as we discussed. This is not the harotze b'chinas merutza v'yitzia b'chinas histalkus. Ratzo is in the form of merutza, like a rush, a drive. That's also not a bad word. V'yitzia, and exiting, and it's form of histalkus, withdrawing from the place that it manifested in. V'ashuv b'chinas hispashtus v'yisyashvus. And shuv is a sense of extension, and hispashtus expansion, and hisyashvus and settling in or integrating and internalizing. Shari b'shuv ariu meir b'gili b'akeli. Because the air, in the state of shuv, it's radiating and illuminating and vitalizing the energy in a revealed way in the keli. The shneim einim shayachim b'chinas haratzon. And both these, as we discussed, are not shayach in ratzon. The harotze einim b'chinas merutza, because the harotze in ratzon is not in the form of merutza of a drive or a rush. Machas shlein nisracha klal, like we discussed, because it was never distanced. And it's not in a form of removal or withdrawal or receding. Because it never became a separate personality. You could say the moti v'lei moti that it's in the state of heder hispashtus. It's not extending as much as initially it extends. Because it gets more encompassed in the source. So it's a very subtle movement, but not quite a rotze v'shuv. But there is a movement. In the example I gave, it fits very well. The chief of staff, also you can find two states. There's a state where the king gives him an order, and all his job is to convey that command, the ratzon, and he conveys it. That's his job, that's it. But he's right where the king, but then there's the state where the king is not commanding him, he's just spending time with the king. And he's not even getting a command. So that's somewhat even more encompassed in the source, because then there's only the king. There's not even the ratzon HaMelech. And therefore the chief of staff's role is then just simply being in the presence of the king, not at all. It's like a student in the presence of the teacher, where the teacher is teaching. There's the students in the presence of the teacher, where the student is saying something, but the teacher is right there with him and feeding him. And then there's, of course, the other students that are apart, and meruchak mimkeirei. So you can find many examples to understand this. Like I just gave an example here. I gave example of three states that very clearly. So you have the Ratzo v'shuv of the student. You have the moti v'lei moti. 1 second, I'm in the middle of speaking. 1 second. You have the Ratzo v'shuv of the student. You have the moti v'lei moti of the student, or like the chief of staff in the presence of his master. And there too, there can be a little movement back and forth, like he just described. 1 second.
So which level is moti v'lei moti?
I just explained. It's ratzon and kesser.
That's in ratzon.
No, I understand. Ratzon is moti v'loi moti.
Yeah, and I just gave examples for it.
No, I understood that moti v'loi moti, but which level? The ratzon is moti v'loi moti.
I just said ratzon kesser for the fourth time. Yes, ratzon kesser. I see he still continues to explain, so it's not over yet. I'm just wondering where I should stop. One second. Yeah, I'm going to stop here. But he's going to speak more about why this is not called a rotze and shuv, even though it's some hispashtus. There is something, because ratzon is coming from the nefesh, like in the examples we're discussing here, and it's still not quite a full movement. So he's going to discuss more of this. You can read on if you like, but I'm going to stop here because it's not. I don't want to stop in the middle of a sentence. I think it's a good place to stop, but there's going to be more explanation, which is good news, of course. I will stop here. So he's now moved into another state, mati v'lei mati, interesting. Page Sama. Okay, so we're middle of page 60. We'll stop here, middle of the paragraph. Any questions?
I'm curious to know if mati velo mati is almost like a shorish for Ratzo v'shuv, because it exists in ratzon. It's almost like a paradigm or a concept or an archetype of Ratzo v'shuv, except on a more limited scale because it's within ratzon relative to shorish.
Can you ask that again? I'm sorry.
I asked if mati velo mati is like an archetype or paradigm for Ratzo v'shuv because it's within ratzon itself, and it's a more limited.
He says it's not Ratzo v'shuv.
No, I just understand that, but it's like it. It has similarities, and it's like and it's above it. It's in ratzon. It's not in these pashtus. So it's
well,
almost
he's going
like
to explain. You're going to see. He's going to discuss this more at length in the next 2 pages. Exactly more about it. I would not venture to come to any conclusion like that. Is there similarities? Obviously, we're talking about the movement, talking about source and an entity and the connection relationship between 2 entities. So there's some commonality, but before we exactly explain what commonality, what isn't common, I would continue reading till we finish it.
Okay.
That's what I would advise. Because it's going to be very critical in understanding the bigger theme of Samach Vav, of the interface, what we accomplish through our Aveda down below when we reach these higher levels, because that's where this is all headed, of course. That'll be probably another 4 or 5 pages when he goes back to mitzvahs and our Aveda, but yeah. Bottom line, we're middle of a topic, literally smack right in the middle. And as you see, I process as little as I can, just enough to understand what we're reading, and it'll all come together very nicely, I believe. But by all means, you can read on. Feel free to see what he says afterwards.
It's a lot easier to wait for you to do it. I'm just joking.
No, it depends. Listen, it's a topic, and it's I think we're going
for
at a
sure.
good pace.
If I were burning, I go. Sometimes I do go forward. Maybe I will go forward.
Yeah, we'll get there.
It's interesting. It's good stuff.
Yeah. Okay, so let's stop here.
Your schedule for this coming week is normal? No, you don't expect to have any days off?
As stands now, no. Maybe Friday I may be off. But that's the end of the week, so we have time. Then next week, of course, I think starting
Pesach.
Wednesday. Pesach, Wednesday, right? A week from Wednesday.
Are we going to learn during Chol HaMoed, or no? Is that complete
I'm
Pesach?
going to be
teaching.
in Texas.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be really available.
Okay.
We'll be a lot absorbing.
Yeah. Now I'll be busy processing.
Okay. Very good stuff. Very good stuff.
Did you stop the recording?
I'm going to stop it right now. It said middle of page 60. I don't think I stopped it.